Hey everybody, we are back in my channel and we are having another episode of our Bold Conversations. So, our topic for today is relationships. And for me, this is something that is a little bit of a hard topic to tackle because I've had my own struggles with having relationships. Um, I grew up. Uh, in a place where I didn't really understand relationships very well. And it's taken me a long time to really grow in this environment and in this self-care piece of how we build relationships from the inside out. And now the first main relationship that you have to build is with yourself. And that was something that was a key learning that I did when I started to think about why my relationships weren't as successful as I wanted them to be. Now, what relationships am I referring to? I'm referring to relationships that are not romantic by nature, that are not fueled by any kind of agenda, or, you're just wanting a friendship with someone. And considering that we are soon to be celebrating Valentine's Day, I thought that it'd be a good idea to kind of talk about this, have a bold conversation about this topic, which is something that nobody really talks about. Um, so, the first thing that I realized when I did my research and, as a part of the way in which I wanted to improve on my life, I sought out therapy because one place where my relationships were not always very consistent were in my personal life. And I really wanted to see what was going on, weed it out, and kind of give myself an opportunity to have another opinion or have somebody that has no attachment whatsoever or anything like that to be the one person that would be like my north in this self-discovery of what could be going on. So I um the first thing that I learned was boundaries. One thing that I've always struggled with a lot is boundaries. How do I set up boundaries with people where I don't need to be super aggressive about it, or I don't need to be, you know, uh, inconsistent with my boundaries out of fear of not being accepted or not being liked or being rejected because I have boundaries, or then being too intimidated when people don't, kind of go into the boundaries that I would like to set. So I think that this is the number one thing that we need to work on as people. We need to decide how we want to set boundaries and what our boundaries are. And that's why I said that the most important relationship you will ever have is with yourself. Because unless you know yourself and you know what you are comfortable with, what you're uncomfortable with, how far you allow people to step in, how far you are willing to step into other people's space. Those are all the things that you kind of have to figure out with yourself before you go out there and open up conversations and open up, yourself to have relationships with other people. So the second thing that I realized, and this I mostly realized through my relationship with my students and my work, was to keep judgments at bay. When you are kind of judgmental or people fear that you're judging them, that sets people up to be defensive. And I've realized that in many ways, we can be judgmental without even using words, just with our faces, our facial expressions, the way in which we react to people, how we react to the things that they're saying. It takes a lot of vulnerability to put yourself out there and to really try to build a relationship, a friendship, any kind of relationship with anybody. So I think that that was the second thing that I really learned throughout my search, my self search of how I wanted to rebuild this part of myself so that I could open myself up and have successful relationships. So the next thing is to stop filtering. When you're filtering out everything that you're saying, that is very, very tied together to the judging. When you are filtering out what you're saying, or you're measuring what you're saying, or you're even kind of trying to keep track of how much you're revealing about yourself to somebody else, that sets you up to feel or think that the other person might be judging you like you would be judging them. And sometimes, we come in with our preconceived notions, or we come into relationships thinking that that person has an insight into the filters that we have on our own brains. And it's kind of hard to really just have perspective and think that somebody that's coming into a relationship with you is not really looking at things the same way that you do. So that is something that I really have learned throughout my relationships with coworkers. Teachers, we are in the front lines of everything. I mean, we step into a classroom space and students are going to study every single thing that we are wearing, we are saying, we are, how we wore our hair, the everything. I mean, makeup, no makeup, all of the things, the shoes, they look at everything and they are studying you because they're learning from you. They're learning everything about life, about being an adult, about what adults look like. And it's hard to kind of open your mind a little bit into not being judged by other people and putting down those defenses and putting down those filters, because we are so much in the limelight of everything from the moment we step into that space to the moment we leave. And even beyond that, we see somebody in Target, or we go to the grocery store and we find somebody, and that automatically you're not there just shopping for your groceries or whatever, you're the teacher that's at the store. So it's like that also is a part of how I've needed to really just dig in and relearn how to build my relationships. And then that leads me into the next thing, being vulnerable. Let me say that one again. Number 4, being vulnerable. I recently have done uh, reading and listening to podcasts, specifically Brene Brown, because I wanted to learn more about that and about that word. Usually vulnerability is a word that we use in a negative sense. But at the same time, when I started reading up on Brene Brown, I also did Gwendolyn Doyle, and I've done a few different women that have been pretty influential on how I see vulnerability. It's not at all anything negative. And it comes, I think vulnerability is closely tied to the other two that I said, no lowering your filters. I think that being vulnerable is the hardest part about having relationships, because when you're vulnerable, your feelings, your emotions, your heart are in a place where you cannot protect it 100%. And I think that that's hard. That is really hard. But the first thing that I learned, and the first step, we can talk 500 years about the things you shouldn't do, but what do I do? How do I build those relationships? How can I be vulnerable? So the first thing that I learned is that I needed to be vulnerable with myself. I am a very spontaneous person. That's why I love doing lives, because I don't need to have so much of a filter when I'm doing a live. I can just talk into the camera, and it's this sense of freedom that I really appreciate. And so it also means that I'm being vulnerable, because if I make a mistake, if I mispronounce something, if, I say something and I, I can't be filtering myself 100%. And the minute that something comes out wrong, everybody's looking at it and it's out there before I can stop it or control it. So I kind of think that being vulnerable is something that you have to be okay with doing with yourself, being vulnerable with your thoughts, being vulnerable with your emotions. And how do I do that? The first thing you have to do is be truthful with yourself. And the way that you can do that is by, in your brain, we all talk to ourselves, and that's true, even though people try not to say that a lot out loud, but we do talk to ourselves in our brain. And the first thing that you have to realize is that you can be your best coach, you can be your best friend, or you can be your worst enemy. And there's no news in that. That's something that everybody kind of knows, but nobody talks about this and puts it out there. So the first thing that you have to do is realize that you do have value. You are important. You are loved. But you have to not only say that to yourself, you have to grow into believing it. And that is hard. The second thing, you have to be okay with mistakes. And that's something that I had to learn how to do. When you make mistakes and you realize, a part of being human is making mistakes and I can learn from them, and you develop that growth mindset, not only your mind is capable of growing, your heart is also capable of growing. And so this vulnerable part is really a key to unlocking your relationships. When you can be vulnerable, you also have to make sure that you are very aware of your boundaries. Because if your boundaries are not something that you're aware of and somebody crosses a line that you didn't really want them to cross, then you don't feel like you can be vulnerable. But at the same time, if you had set that boundary before and you had kind of, talked through it or given the person some kind of indication that that was a boundary, then there was no need to cross it in the first place. So I think it's a development of how we also engage with people, and at the same time, what am I willing to put out there and what am I not willing to put out there? And it takes baby steps. I mean, I'm no expert, and I've said that before and I'll say it every single episode. I am no expert at all. But I'm just a person, and we learn best from people that are just people. I mean, that's how it is. And one thing that also is very important is how, number 5, body language versus verbal language. When our bodies say something and our mouth is saying something different, it can be confusing. And sometimes, we are all people, like I just said, we're all figuring life out. And not everybody has the same understanding on feelings, emotions, body language. It can also be something that's cultural. What in some cultures is an invitation, in other cultures can look like, no, this is a boundary. Stop. So it's also something that you have to do your homework as a person, because if you're trying to become a friend with somebody that is from a different culture than you, it's important for you to do a little bit of homework, especially if that person is growing to be really important to you. It's okay and it's acceptable for you to do homework on the things that they like. And the best homework you can do is number 6, listen. It's important to listen as a friend. I know that sometimes we have so much inside and we just want to, bring it all out and overshare and share more, but we need to stop sometimes and just listen. I have had to learn this one really, like, a lot, and it's a lesson. I feel like life presents lessons to you over and over to really have you learn the skills that you need to learn and develop throughout your life so that you can be the person that you need to be. And so that is a lesson that has come up to me many times. I have had to learn and relearn that I have to do better at listening. And I think that when we know, or we are getting to know somebody that's new, that's from a different culture, or even from your own culture, the best secret to knowing how to be vulnerable, knowing what boundaries you need to set, knowing if that is the person you want to make friends with, because we can pick our friends. That's the magic of being an adult and not being an adult when you're younger. You can pick your friends for sure. And how can we do that? By listening. Listening is key. And I have been married for the last, I have to think about this. Oh my gosh. I've been married since 2005. So that means it's, can you tell I've worked all day and my brain is just bursting at the seams. I have been married since 2005. I'm going to leave it at that. And one thing that I think was key to building the relationship, which is like, my marriage is the most successful relationship I have ever had. I think it was the hand of God or something, because I am honestly going to say I don't know how we have built such an amazing, beautiful relationship like the one we have. And I know you might be looking at this video, so I'm going to wink at you. You know who you are. And so one thing that we always did and that we did really well from the beginning was listen to each other. And I found it so special that I told him one time my favorite candy bar, and I showed up to my car a few days later and he had left it there, wrapped in a little paper saying, congratulations for our first week of friendship. And that was super special. And that's something that we can do as people. We can just, in any kind of relationship, you can listen to the person and really get to know them. That is also a part of the hygge I was talking about yesterday. When we treasure and find happiness in just getting to know somebody and delighting in other people and who they are, what their soul looks like to us, that makes us happy and it makes us into great people to have relationships with. So, a part of the bold conversation are questions that I'm going to leave for you to ponder at the end. How has your past influenced present relationships? Let's ponder on that one for a second. How has your past influenced present relationships? And sometimes we drag stuff into relationships. We drag stuff into friendships. We have filters, like I said, and we have to be mindful of those because that person is new in your life or recent, and the past is way beyond their scope and what they've lived through with you. Number 2, do you give anyone a chance? It's hard. Being vulnerable and opening yourself up to a relationship is hard. But do you give anyone a chance? Or do they have to look a certain way? Or do they have to be a certain kind of person? And the last question, is it hard to let people in? My answer to that one is yes, it is hard. Doesn't mean it's impossible. So I will see everybody later. And thank you for being a part of this journey that I'm doing. And it's exciting. My first baby steps. Have a great day and see you later. And I am ending my stream.